Imagine trying to tell the story of humanity when most of its pages are missing. Long before the first cities, before writing, before recorded history, entire human species walked the earth, survived unimaginable disasters, and vanished without leaving clear answers behind. From mysterious cousins who disappeared to climate shifts that transformed the planet, prehistoric history remains filled with questions that science still cannot fully explain. The last days of the Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago, Europe looked nothing like it does today. Towering glaciers stretched across the northern horizon. Vast grasslands rolled for hundreds of miles, interrupted only by dense forests, frozen rivers, and rugged mountain ranges. Herds of mammoths crossed the open plains. Woolly rhinoceroses grazed beneath gray skies. Giant deer with antlers wider than a man's height wandered through ancient valleys. It was a harsh world, but it was far from empty. For hundreds of thousands of years, another kind of human called this landscape home. They hunted these frozen wildernesses long before our own ancestors arrived. They mastered fire, crafted sophisticated stone tools, cared for injured members of their communities, and survived ice ages that would have challenged even modern humans. They were not primitive monsters or unintelligent cave dwellers. They were people different from us, yet remarkably familiar. Today, we know them as the Neanderthals. Yet despite decades of research, one question continues to puzzle archaeologists, geneticists, and anthropologists alike. What happened to them? How could a population that survived some of Earth's most unforgiving environments simply disappear? The answer is surprisingly difficult to find because the evidence left behind is incredibly limited. Unlike later civilizations, Neanderthals built no cities of stone. They left no written language. No historical records describe their lives. Everything scientists know comes from scattered bones, worn stone tools, traces of ancient campfires, and fragments of DNA preserved for tens of thousands of years. Every new discovery answers one question while creating several more. The first Neanderthal fossils were identified in the 19th century inside Germany's Neander Valley. At the time, many researchers believed the unusual bones belonged to a diseased modern human. The skull looked different. The brow was heavier. The skeleton appeared stronger than expected. Only later did scientists realize they had uncovered evidence of an entirely different branch of the human family tree. As additional discoveries emerged across Europe and Western Asia, a remarkable picture slowly began to take shape. Neanderthals were widespread. Their territory stretched from the Atlantic coast of Europe to the mountains of Central Asia. They occupied caves overlooking the Mediterranean, forests in present-day France, valleys across Germany, and even regions reaching toward Siberia. This was not a tiny, isolated group struggling to survive. For hundreds of thousands of years, they successfully adapted to changing climates, shifting ecosystems, and challenging environments. Their bodies reflected that long adaptation. Compared to modern humans, Neanderthals were generally shorter but far more powerfully built. Thick bones supported heavy muscles. Broad chests helped conserve heat during freezing winters. Their limbs were compact, reducing heat loss in cold climates. These features were not signs of primitiveness. They were solutions. Evolution had shaped Neanderthals into specialists perfectly suited for Ice Age Europe. For generations, popular culture portrayed them as dim-witted cavemen armed with crude clubs. Modern archaeology paints a very different picture. Their stone tools became increasingly sophisticated over time. They selected specific types of rock, carefully shaping them into blades, scrapers, spear points, and cutting implements designed for particular tasks. Some archaeological sites even suggest they produced adhesives by heating birch bark under carefully controlled conditions, a surprisingly complex process requiring planning and knowledge of temperature. Evidence also indicates that Neanderthals controlled fire with remarkable consistency. Fire offered warmth during freezing winters. It provided protection from predators. It allowed meat to be cooked. It created gathering places where families likely shared food, repaired tools, and strengthened social bonds. Although no one can know exactly what conversations took place around those ancient fires, the archaeological evidence suggests these communities were far more socially connected than once believed. Perhaps the strongest evidence comes from individuals who survived serious injuries. Some skeletons reveal broken bones that healed completely. Others belong to elderly individuals who lived despite severe physical limitations. Such people could not have survived alone. Someone gathered food for them. Someone protected them. Someone cared for them through months or even years of recovery. Compassion, it seems, may have deep roots in human history. Then another discovery challenged old assumptions even further. At several archaeological sites, researchers uncovered pigments made from naturally occurring minerals. Some shells appeared to have been collected not for food, but for decorative purposes. Eagle talons found at certain sites showed markings suggesting they may have been worn as ornaments. These discoveries sparked an intriguing possibility. Did Neanderthals create symbolic objects? Did they decorate themselves? Did they possess traditions whose meanings are forever lost? The evidence remains incomplete, but each discovery moves them farther from the outdated stereotype of unintelligent survivors. Meanwhile, another group of humans had begun expanding into Eurasia. These newcomers were anatomically modern humans. They shared many physical similarities with people alive today. As they spread across Europe, they entered landscapes already inhabited by Neanderthal communities. For thousands of years, both populations existed at roughly the same time. Exactly what happened during those encounters remains one of prehistory's greatest mysteries. Were they rivals competing for the same hunting grounds? Did they avoid one another? Did they exchange knowledge? Or did they sometimes cooperate? Genetics has revealed one extraordinary clue. When researchers successfully extracted ancient DNA from Neanderthal remains and compared it with living people, the results transformed our understanding of human evolution. Many people living today carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA. This could only happen if the two populations met and had children together. The discovery completely overturned earlier ideas that modern humans simply replaced every other human species without interaction. Instead, the evidence points toward a far more complicated story. The boundary between different human groups was not absolute. There were encounters, there were shared families, there was genetic exchange. Even today, traces of those ancient connections remain inside millions of people around the world. Yet this remarkable discovery only deepened the central mystery. If Neanderthals mixed with modern humans, why did they disappear as a distinct population? One explanation focuses on numbers. Imagine two neighboring populations. One contains several 100,000 individuals. The other contains only a few thousand scattered across enormous distances. Even without conflict, the smaller population could gradually become absorbed through generations of intermarriage. Its unique identity would slowly fade while portions of its DNA continued living inside a much larger population. Some researchers believe something similar may have happened. Others argue the explanation cannot be that simple. Climate was changing once again. The Ice Age environment shifted repeatedly during the final millennia of Neanderthal existence. Forests expanded into former grasslands. Animal populations moved into new territories. Hunting patterns that had remained stable for thousands of years suddenly became unpredictable. Species that specialized in one environment often struggle when that environment changes rapidly. Could Neanderthals have faced exactly that challenge? Perhaps, but archaeological evidence complicates the picture. These were people who had already survived dramatic climate fluctuations many times before. Environmental change alone seems insufficient to explain their disappearance. Another theory considers technology. Modern humans may have developed wider social networks, allowing ideas and innovations to spread much faster between distant communities. A successful hunting strategy discovered hundreds of miles away could eventually reach many different groups. Better tools, improved clothing, more efficient food gathering, greater flexibility. If information moved more quickly through larger networks, even small advantages could accumulate over centuries. Still, proving this idea remains difficult. Stone tools reveal only fragments of ancient behavior. They cannot record conversations, traditions, or shared knowledge. Another possibility centers on population size itself. Small, isolated communities face unique challenges. Random events as severe winter, poor hunting season, disease, or declining birth rates can have enormous effects when only a few individuals remain. Over many generations, isolated populations may gradually shrink until recovery becomes increasingly difficult. Some computer simulations suggest this process alone could explain the gradual disappearance of Neanderthal communities without requiring dramatic conflicts or sudden catastrophes. If true, Their story may have ended not with one defining event, but with countless ordinary hardships accumulating across centuries. There is another reason this mystery remains so difficult. The archaeological record is incomplete. Every fossil represents an extraordinary accident of preservation. Most individuals who ever lived left no trace that survived tens of thousands of years. Entire campsites disappeared beneath rivers, bones dissolved in acidic soils, wooden tools decayed long ago. Ancient landscapes changed beyond recognition. Scientists are attempting to reconstruct hundreds of thousands of years of history using only scattered pieces of an enormous puzzle. Occasionally, a single discovery changes everything. A newly excavated cave, a fragment of ancient DNA, a better dating technique, a forgotten layer of sediment. Each one has the potential to rewrite what we thought we knew. That is exactly what makes the Neanderthal mystery so enduring. The question is no longer whether they were intelligent enough to survive. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that they were. The real mystery is understanding why such capable, adaptable, and resilient humans eventually disappeared as a separate people while leaving part of themselves behind in us. In a way, the Neanderthals never truly vanished. Their tools remain buried beneath ancient soil. Their camps still emerge from caves across Europe and Asia. Their genes continue to exist within millions of living people. And every new excavation reminds us that the story of humanity is far more complex than a simple tale of one species replacing another. Instead, it is a story of shared landscapes, shared histories, and ancient connections that are only now beginning to emerge from the shadows of prehistory. The Denisovans, the human species we found without seeing. Imagine discovering an entirely new branch of the human family tree from a single finger bone, no larger than a child's thumb. No complete skeleton, no ancient village, no carefully preserved burial. Just one tiny fragment of bone hidden inside a cave in southern Siberia. For generations, scientists believed that identifying a new human species required an unmistakable fossil, perhaps a skull, a jawbone, or an entire skeleton revealing unique physical features. Instead, one of the greatest discoveries in prehistoric archaeology arrived through something almost invisible. It began not with appearance, but with DNA. The result reshaped our understanding of human evolution and revealed that our prehistoric world was far more crowded and far more interconnected than anyone had imagined. The story starts in a remote corner of the Altai Mountains, where a cave overlooking forested valleys had quietly preserved evidence of human occupation for tens of thousands of years. Today it is known as Denisova Cave, named after a hermit who once lived nearby. To archaeologists, however, it became something much greater. Excavations uncovered stone tools, animal bones, ornaments, and fragments of ancient human remains. Most of those remains were remarkably small. One fragment in particular seemed almost insignificant, the end of a finger bone from a young individual. At first glance, there was nothing extraordinary about it. It did not resemble a dramatic fossil capable of rewriting history. Its shape alone offered few clues. It could not confidently be identified as belonging to a Neanderthal or to a modern human. Normally, that uncertainty might have left the bone sitting quietly inside a museum collection. Instead, researchers decided to attempt something still relatively new. They extracted ancient DNA. Recovering DNA from prehistoric remains is extraordinarily difficult. Time slowly breaks genetic material into tiny fragments. Heat, moisture, bacteria, and changing environments all accelerate its destruction. Most ancient fossils contain little or no usable DNA. Denisova Cave offered unusually favorable conditions. Its cool, stable environment had protected microscopic traces of genetic material for tens of thousands of years. When scientists compared that DNA with the genomes of Neanderthals and living humans, they expected one of two answers. Instead, they found neither. The genetic sequence belonged to an unknown population. It was related to both Neanderthals and modern humans, yet clearly different from either. Without intending to, researchers had uncovered evidence of another human lineage. The world suddenly realized that one tiny finger bone represented an entire population previously unknown to science. They became known simply as the Denisovans. Unlike Neanderthals, whose distinctive skeletons had been studied for more than a century, the Denisovans remained almost invisible. Scientists had discovered an entire human group before they knew what its members actually looked like. That unusual situation remains one of the most remarkable aspects of the discovery. Imagine finding evidence of a civilization without ever seeing its buildings. That is roughly what happened here. Researchers knew the Denisovans existed because their DNA clearly identified them as a separate lineage, yet their physical appearance remained largely hidden. As more discoveries emerged from Denisova Cave, the mystery deepened. A few teeth were recovered. They appeared unusually large compared with those of modern humans. Strong jaws may have supported them, but complete skulls capable of confirming those ideas have never been found. Instead of revealing a clear picture, every new fossil raised additional questions. Were Denisovans tall? Did they resemble Neanderthals? Did they possess unique facial features unlike any human known today? The answers remain uncertain because the fossil record is still astonishingly small. What scientists do know comes primarily from genetics rather than anatomy. DNA revealed that Denisovans shared a common ancestor with Neanderthals hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Over immense spans of time, both groups gradually evolved along different paths. Meanwhile, modern humans followed another branch of the evolutionary tree. For much of the 20th century, this family tree appeared relatively straightforward. Then Denisovans complicated everything. Instead of one ancient cousin, humans had at least two. And the discoveries did not stop there. Perhaps the greatest surprise arrived when researchers compared Denisovan DNA with that of people living today. The results were astonishing. Some modern populations possess measurable amounts of Denisovan ancestry. This meant Denisovans and modern humans had not merely crossed paths. They had children together. Those ancient encounters left genetic signatures that still exist thousands of generations later. The highest levels of Denisovan ancestry appear among populations in regions such as Papua New Guinea and parts of Oceania. That finding immediately created another mystery. How could people living thousands of kilometers from Siberia inherit DNA from individuals discovered inside a cave in the Altai Mountains? The simplest explanation is that Denisovans occupied a much larger geographic range than originally imagined. Instead of existing only in northern Asia, they may have spread across enormous parts of eastern and southeastern Asia. Their territory could have stretched through forests, mountain ranges, river valleys, and tropical environments separated by thousands of kilometers. If that interpretation is correct, Denisovans were not an isolated group living in one remote cave. They may have been one of the most widespread human populations of the prehistoric world. Unfortunately, archaeology has not yet caught up with genetics. DNA suggests a vast distribution. Fossils remain frustratingly rare. Every excavation now carries the possibility of uncovering new Denisovan remains, yet identifying them is far from simple. Many ancient human bones look remarkably similar. Without preserved DNA, distinguishing one human lineage from another can be extremely difficult. This means museums around the world may already contain Denisovan fossils that have not yet been recognized. Advances in genetic analysis continue to change that picture. Researchers can now examine tiny traces of ancient proteins in DNA preserved inside fossil fragments that once seemed scientifically useless. Each improvement expands the possibility that previously overlooked discoveries may reveal entirely new chapters of human evolution. Another remarkable discovery demonstrated just how interconnected prehistoric humans truly were. Among the remains recovered from Denisova Cave was a small fragment of bone belonging to a teenage girl. Genetic analysis revealed something extraordinary. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. She was a direct descendant of two different human groups. This single discovery transformed abstract theories into undeniable reality. Scientists had long suspected interaction between different populations. Now they possessed direct evidence. These ancient groups did not always remain isolated. They met, they formed families. Their histories became intertwined. Rather than imagining prehistoric humans as separate species living in completely different worlds, researchers increasingly view them as neighboring populations whose lives occasionally overlapped. That realization changes how we think about human evolution itself. Evolution was not a straight line leading neatly toward modern humans. It resembled a branching river system. Different populations separated. Some reunited. Genes flowed back and forth, Entire lineages emerged, adapted, and sometimes disappeared while leaving small traces inside others. The Denisovans illustrate that complexity perfectly. Yet, despite remarkable advances in genetics, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Where did Denisovans first evolve? How many populations existed? What languages or perhaps forms of communication did they use? How sophisticated were their technologies? Did they create symbolic art or personal ornaments similar to those found among other prehistoric humans? The archaeological evidence offers intriguing hints. Objects recovered from Denisova Cave include carefully crafted stone tools and ornamental items that demonstrate planning and skilled workmanship. Whether every artifact belonged specifically to Denisovans, however, remains difficult to determine because the cave was occupied repeatedly by different human groups over immense periods of time. One layer may represent Neanderthals, another may belong to Denisovans, still another may preserve evidence of modern humans. Untangling that sequence requires painstaking analysis extending over years. Meanwhile, genetics continues providing unexpected insights. Some Denisovan genes appear to have benefited later human populations. Perhaps the best-known example involves adaptations associated with life at high altitude. Certain modern populations living on the Tibetan Plateau possess genetic variants linked to surviving in environments where oxygen levels are much lower than at sea level. Research suggests those adaptations may ultimately trace back to Denisovan ancestry. If so, an ancient human population that disappeared tens of thousands of years ago continues helping people thrive in one of Earth's most demanding environments. It is a remarkable reminder that extinction does not always erase influence. Sometimes it changes form, the people themselves vanish, their biological legacy remains. Even so, the Denisovans eventually disappeared as a distinct population. Exactly why remains unknown. Some researchers suggest they gradually merged into expanding modern human populations through repeated interbreeding. Others believe environmental changes reduced their numbers over thousands of years. Still others propose that isolated communities slowly declined until no independent populations remained. Current evidence cannot decisively favor one explanation over another. Once again, archaeology confronts its greatest limitation. The prehistoric record is incomplete. Every discovery depends on extraordinary preservation, fortunate excavation, and advances in scientific technology. Entire populations may have lived and disappeared without leaving fossils capable of surviving to the present. Denisovans remind us how much remains hidden beneath ancient landscapes. Only a few decades ago, no one even suspected they existed. Today, they occupy a permanent place within the human family tree. That transformation occurred because scientists refused to overlook a tiny fragment of bone. It is an extraordinary lesson in humility. Our understanding of prehistory is not finished. It continues evolving with every excavation, every laboratory breakthrough, and every new genetic sequence recovered from ancient remains. Somewhere beneath layers of soil, inside unexplored caves, or resting unnoticed within museum collections, additional evidence may still be waiting. A single tooth, a fragment of jaw, another piece of DNA. Any one of them could reveal that the human story is even more diverse than we currently imagine. The Denisovans prove that history's greatest discoveries are not always the largest. Sometimes an entire lost branch of humanity can remain hidden inside a fossil small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, quietly waiting for science to recognize what it has been preserving all along. The Younger Dryas, the Ice Age mystery that changed the world around 12,900 years ago? Something happened that no one expected. For thousands of years, Earth's climate had been slowly warming. Massive glaciers that had covered much of the northern hemisphere were beginning to retreat. Rivers expanded, forests spread into once frozen landscapes, and animals followed the changing seasons into newly opened territory. Everything suggested that the last ice age was coming to an end. Then, almost without warning, the trend reversed. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Regions that had been warming suddenly became cold again. In some places, the change appears to have happened within just a few decades, a remarkably short time in geological history. Forests retreated. Ice advanced once more. Rainfall patterns shifted. Entire ecosystems were forced to adapt almost overnight. For prehistoric people living through that period, the world itself must have seemed unpredictable. Scientists call this sudden return to colder conditions the Younger Dryas, named after a small Arctic wildflower whose pollen appears in sediment layers from that time. More than a century after it was first recognized, one fundamental question still remains unanswered. Why did it happen? The mystery begins with evidence buried beneath lakes, glaciers, caves, and the ocean floor. Unlike written history, prehistoric climate leaves no books or official records. Instead, researchers reconstruct ancient environments using natural archives. Every layer of lake sediment, every annual ring inside an ancient tree, every bubble trapped inside glacial ice preserves tiny pieces of information about Earth's distant past. When scientists began studying these records from different parts of the world, they noticed something remarkable. Independent sources were telling the same story. Temperatures had risen steadily after the height of the last ice age. Then, around 12,900 years ago, the warming suddenly stopped. In Greenland, ice cores revealed an astonishingly rapid decline in temperature. The chemical composition of trapped ice suggested that some regions cooled by several degrees in what may have been only a human lifetime. For modern society, a few degrees of global temperature change is significant. For prehistoric hunter-gatherers depending entirely on natural ecosystems, such changes could completely transform daily life. Plants that had flourished during warmer years struggled to survive. Animal migration routes shifted. Water sources changed. Entire landscapes were reshaped. Yet the cooling did not last forever. Roughly 1,200 years later, temperatures rose again, and Earth resumed the warming trend that eventually led to the climate we know today. The Younger Dryas appears almost like a pause in the planet's recovery from the Ice Age. But what caused that pause? One of the earliest explanations focuses on enormous quantities of fresh water released from melting glaciers. At the end of the Ice Age, gigantic ice sheets covered much of North America. As they melted, they created immense freshwater lakes held back by walls of ice. Some researchers believe one or more of those natural barriers eventually failed. If enough fresh water suddenly poured into the North Atlantic Ocean, it could have disrupted major ocean currents responsible for transporting warm water northward. These currents function like a vast conveyor belt, moving heat around the planet. If that system weakened, temperatures across large parts of the northern hemisphere could have fallen rapidly. Climate models show that such disruptions are physically possible. Sediment records also suggest that large releases of fresh water occurred during this period. However, uncertainty remains. Exactly when those floods happened, and whether they were large enough to trigger the Younger Dryas continues to be debated. The evidence is compelling, but not conclusive. Another hypothesis has attracted enormous public attention over the past 2 decades. Known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, it proposes that fragments of a comet or asteroid struck Earth or exploded in the atmosphere around the beginning of the Younger Dryas. According to this idea, the event could have ignited widespread wildfires, disrupted climate systems, and contributed to environmental changes observed across several continents. Supporters point to unusual materials found in some sediment layers, tiny glass-like particles, microscopic diamonds, elevated concentrations of certain elements associated with high-energy impacts. These discoveries suggest that something unusual may have occurred near the start of the Younger Dryas. Some researchers argue the evidence fits an extraterrestrial event. Others disagree. Critics note that similar materials can form through multiple natural processes. They also question whether the proposed evidence appears consistently enough across different archaeological sites to support a global impact. Perhaps the greatest challenge is the absence of a universally accepted impact crater dating precisely to this period. Large impacts usually leave unmistakable scars on Earth's surface. Finding one would dramatically strengthen the hypothesis. So far, however, no single crater has gained broad scientific agreement as the definitive source. As a result, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains exactly what its name suggests, a hypothesis under active investigation rather than an established conclusion. This ongoing debate illustrates how science actually works. New ideas are proposed, evidence is collected, independent teams test the claims. Some explanations grow stronger over time, others are revised or replaced. Uncertainty is not a weakness, it is part of the process. Meanwhile, the archaeological record reveals how prehistoric people experienced these environmental changes. Human communities living near the end of the Ice Age depended heavily on local ecosystems. Their survival required intimate knowledge of animal behavior, seasonal plants, freshwater sources, and weather patterns. Rapid climate shifts could influence every aspect of daily life. If grazing animals changed migration routes, hunters needed to adapt. If forests expanded into open grasslands, familiar hunting grounds disappeared. If rivers changed course, entire campsites might be abandoned. These adjustments were not necessarily sudden crises. Many prehistoric groups proved remarkably resilient. Archaeological evidence shows that people often developed new hunting strategies, explored unfamiliar territories, and adopted different technologies as environments evolved. Rather than viewing ancient humans as passive victims of climate change, researchers increasingly recognize them as flexible problem solvers, capable of remarkable innovation. Still, adaptation had limits. Some regions experienced profound ecological transformation. Species that had thrived under colder conditions gradually declined as habitats changed. Others expanded into newly favorable environments. This constantly shifting landscape created a world in motion. One of the reasons the Younger Dryas remains so fascinating is that its effects appear across multiple scientific disciplines. Geologists study sediment layers, climatologists analyze ice cores, botanists examine fossil pollen, archaeologists investigate changing settlement patterns, geneticists trace population movements. Each field contributes a different piece of the puzzle. Yet no single discipline provides every answer. The mystery lies at the intersection of them all. Modern technology continues revealing details that earlier generations of researchers could scarcely imagine. High-resolution climate models simulate ancient weather systems. Radiocarbon dating becomes increasingly precise. Satellite imagery helps identify long-forgotten landscapes buried beneath vegetation or sediment. Microscopic analysis detects environmental changes invisible to the naked eye. Every improvement allows scientists to ask better questions. Sometimes the answers become clearer. Sometimes entirely new mysteries emerge. The Younger Dryas also reminds us that Earth's climate has never been perfectly stable. Over millions of years, the planet has experienced dramatic shifts, driven by complex interactions between the atmosphere, oceans, ice sheets, volcanic activity, solar energy, and orbital cycles. Understanding those past changes helps researchers place modern climate patterns into a broader geological context. That does not mean every ancient event has a modern equivalent. The circumstances surrounding the Younger Dryas were unique to the end of the last ice age. Nevertheless, studying rapid environmental transitions provides valuable insight into how natural systems respond under changing conditions. Another intriguing aspect of the mystery involves timing. Scientists generally agree that the Younger Dryas began rapidly. Exactly how rapidly remains uncertain. Some evidence suggests noticeable cooling occurred within decades. Other records indicate a more gradual transition depending on geographic location. This difference highlights another challenge in reconstructing prehistory. Earth does not always change uniformly. Different regions can experience the same global event in different ways. Some areas become colder, others become drier. Some ecosystems recover quickly, others require centuries. Piecing together these regional differences is like assembling a mosaic from thousands of scattered fragments. Each new excavation, sediment core, or laboratory analysis adds another tile to the picture. Yet large sections remain missing. That uncertainty continues to inspire research around the world. Scientists return to ancient lakes. They drill deeper ice cores. They excavate new archaeological sites. They refine climate models with increasingly sophisticated data. The Younger Dryas has become one of the most intensively studied climatic events in Earth's recent history, not because every answer has been found, but because so many questions remain open. Did changing ocean circulation trigger the cooling? Did freshwater floods play the dominant role? Could multiple natural processes have combined at nearly the same time? Or is there still an important piece of evidence waiting to be discovered beneath layers of ice, sediment, or ancient soil? At present, no single explanation satisfies every observation. Perhaps the ultimate answer will involve several interacting causes rather than one dramatic event. Nature often operates through combinations rather than simple solutions. What makes the Younger Dryas so compelling is not merely its scientific importance. It is the reminder that even after thousands of years of investigation into Earth's past, our planet still guards extraordinary secrets. Beneath frozen ice, deep lake sediments, and forgotten prehistoric landscapes lies the record of a world that changed with astonishing speed. We have learned enough to recognize that transformation. We have not yet learned enough to explain every detail, and that uncertainty keeps the younger Dryas among the greatest unsolved mysteries of prehistory. The Great Ice Age extinction. Why did the giants vanish? Around the end of the last ice age, the world underwent one of the most dramatic biological transformations in its history. For hundreds of thousands of years, enormous animals had dominated nearly every continent. Towering mammoths crossed frozen grasslands in vast herds. Giant ground sloths wandered through the forests of the Americas. Saber-toothed cats stalked powerful prey across open plains. Woolly rhinoceroses grazed beneath icy skies, while giant deer carried antlers wider than a small car. Then, within what was a relatively short period in geological terms, many of them disappeared. Not just one species, not just one region. Entire groups of large animals vanished from the earth. Their disappearance left behind one of prehistory's greatest unanswered questions. What happened to the giants? Unlike the extinction that ended the age of the dinosaurs, there is no universally accepted explanation for the late Pleistocene extinction. Scientists agree that the losses were enormous, but they continue to debate why they occurred and why they affected different parts of the world so differently. The mystery begins with the remarkable diversity of prehistoric life. The Ice Age was not simply a world of snow and glaciers. Between the frozen regions stretched vast grasslands known today as the Mammoth Steppe. These landscapes supported an astonishing abundance of life. Herds of mammoths grazed alongside wild horses, bison, musk oxen, reindeer, and giant deer. Predators such as wolves, cave lions, and saber-toothed cats hunted across these open plains. It was one of the richest ecosystems the planet had ever seen. For thousands of years, these animals thrived. They survived repeated climate fluctuations. They adapted to changing seasons. Entire populations expanded and contracted as glaciers advanced and retreated. Then something changed. By roughly 12,000 years ago, many of these remarkable creatures had disappeared forever. In North America, mammoths, mastodons, giant beavers, American lions, short-faced bears, giant ground sloths, and several species of large horses all vanished. South America lost many of its enormous mammals as well, including giant armadillo-like glyptodonts and massive ground sloths. Europe saw the disappearance of woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, cave lions, and eventually mammoths. Australia had experienced a similar wave of extinctions much earlier, losing giant marsupials, enormous reptiles, and birds that had dominated the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. Each region tells a slightly different story, and that is exactly what makes solving the mystery so difficult. One of the oldest explanations focuses on climate. The end of the Ice Age brought dramatic environmental change. As temperatures increased, glaciers retreated across the northern hemisphere. Vast grasslands slowly transformed into forests. Rivers changed course. Lakes expanded. Rainfall patterns shifted. Animals that had evolved for cold, open environments suddenly faced entirely new habitats. For species like the woolly mammoth, this posed a serious challenge. These animals were exceptionally well adapted to life on the frozen steppe. Thick fur protected them from extreme cold. Their feeding habits matched the grasses that dominated Ice Age landscapes. As forests gradually replaced those grasslands, suitable habitat shrank. Food sources changed. Migration routes shifted. Populations became increasingly isolated. From this perspective, extinction appears to be the result of environmental transformation rather than a single catastrophic event. But the climate explanation has limitations. After all, mammoths and many other large animals had already survived multiple cycles of warming and cooling during previous ice ages. Why would this climate transition prove different? That question opened the door to another influential theory. Perhaps humans played a much larger role. Modern humans expanded into many parts of the world during roughly the same period that large animals began disappearing. Unlike earlier human populations, These communities developed increasingly sophisticated hunting techniques. They worked together in organized groups. They crafted efficient stone spear points. They understood seasonal animal migrations. Some researchers suggest that even relatively small hunting pressures could have affected species that reproduce slowly. Large mammals often have long pregnancies and produce relatively few offspring. If adult animals were removed faster than populations could recover, numbers might gradually decline until extinction became inevitable. This idea became known as the overkill hypothesis. Its basic argument is straightforward. As humans entered new continents, they encountered animals that had little previous experience with such effective predators. Over generations, sustained hunting pressure may have reduced populations beyond recovery. Supporting evidence comes from several archaeological sites where stone tools appear alongside the remains of extinct animals. Some bones preserve cut marks indicating butchering by prehistoric humans. These discoveries demonstrate that people certainly hunted large Ice Age mammals. The real debate concerns scale. Did humans hunt enough animals to drive entire species toward extinction? Or were these isolated events within much larger ecological systems? Many researchers believe hunting alone cannot fully explain the global pattern. Another possibility combines both ideas. Climate change may have weakened already vulnerable populations by reducing available habitat and food. Human hunting then added additional pressure. Neither factor alone would necessarily guarantee extinction. Together, however, they could have produced devastating long-term effects. This combination model has gained considerable support because it helps explain why extinctions occurred differently across various continents. Regions experiencing severe environmental changes might require relatively little additional pressure before populations collapsed. Other regions could remain stable much longer. The archaeological record seems to support this complexity. Rather than one universal cause, different species may have faced different challenges. Some populations declined primarily because of habitat loss. Others experienced increased hunting. Still others may have been affected by changing ecosystems that disrupted relationships between predators, prey, and vegetation. Nature rarely operates through a single explanation. The fossil evidence itself presents another challenge. Finding ancient bones is only the beginning. Scientists must determine exactly when those animals lived, how large their populations were, whether different groups survived longer than previously believed. Modern dating techniques have dramatically improved those estimates. Occasionally, they completely rewrite accepted timelines. Some mammoth populations, for example, survived far longer than anyone once imagined. Instead of disappearing everywhere at the same time, isolated groups continued living in certain regions thousands of years after mainland populations had vanished. These discoveries demonstrate that extinction was often gradual rather than instantaneous. Different populations followed different paths. The same pattern appears among several other prehistoric species. Extinction was not always a sudden event. It could unfold over centuries, even millennia. Another intriguing clue comes from pollen preserved inside lake sediments. These microscopic grains allow scientists to reconstruct ancient vegetation with remarkable precision. In some regions, researchers observed significant changes in plant communities occurring alongside the disappearance of large grazing animals. The relationship between those events remains uncertain. Did changing vegetation reduce food supplies, or did the disappearance of large herbivores alter ecosystems by allowing forests to expand more rapidly? The answer may involve both processes influencing one another over time. Large animals are not merely inhabitants of ecosystems, they help shape them. Modern elephants, for example, transform landscapes by knocking down trees, dispersing seeds, and creating open grasslands. Ice Age mammoths likely played similar ecological roles. Their disappearance may itself have triggered additional environmental changes. This possibility highlights another fascinating aspect of prehistoric mysteries. Cause and effect are often difficult to separate. Did climate alter ecosystems first? Did animal populations decline independently? Or did each change amplify the others in a complex chain reaction? Researchers continue exploring these questions through increasingly sophisticated techniques. Ancient DNA has become especially valuable. Genetic analysis allows scientists to estimate population sizes long before extinction occurred. Instead of relying solely on fossil numbers, researchers can examine how genetic diversity changed through time. Some studies suggest certain species had already begun declining thousands of years before they finally disappeared. Others appear relatively stable until much later. Again, the picture resists simple explanations. The mystery grows even more intriguing when different continents are compared. Africa retained many of its large mammals. Elephants, rhinoceroses, giraffes, hippopotamuses, and numerous other giants survived into the present. Why? One leading idea focuses on shared evolutionary history. Large African mammals evolved alongside human ancestors for millions of years. Over countless generations, they gradually adapted to increasingly capable hunters. By contrast, animals in the Americas and Australia encountered modern humans much later. Some researchers argue these populations may have been less prepared for such efficient predators. Although this hypothesis remains debated, it illustrates how regional evolutionary histories might influence survival. The extinction mystery also reminds us how incomplete the prehistoric record remains. Only a tiny fraction of animals that once lived became fossils. Many regions remain unexplored. New discoveries continue emerging from caves, riverbanks, and ancient lake beds. Every excavation adds another piece to the puzzle. Sometimes those discoveries confirm existing theories. Sometimes they overturn decades of accepted thinking. That uncertainty is precisely what keeps the debate alive. Few prehistoric questions involved so many scientific disciplines working together. Paleontologists study fossils. Archaeologists examine evidence of human activity. Geneticists recover ancient DNA. Climate scientists reconstruct past environments. Ecologists model changing ecosystems. Each perspective contributes important evidence. None provides every answer. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the Ice Age extinction. History rarely follows a single cause. The disappearance of Earth's prehistoric giants may represent the combined influence of climate, environmental transformation, population dynamics, ecological change, and expanding human societies. The balance between those factors almost certainly differed from one species to another. More than 10,000 years later, the echoes of that transformation remain visible. The mammoth steppe has vanished. The giant ground sloth exists only in fossils. The saber-toothed cat survives only through reconstructed skeletons inside museums. Yet their disappearance continues to shape modern ecosystems and scientific research alike. Every newly discovered fossil, every improved genetic sequence, every ancient pollen sample, every refined climate model, each brings us one step closer to understanding why an entire world of giants faded into prehistory. But for now, the greatest Ice Age extinction remains exactly what it has been for generations. A mystery whose final answer still lies buried somewhere beneath the Earth's oldest landscapes. The Toba supereruption. Did humanity almost disappear? Around 74,000 years ago, long before the first cities, long before farming, and tens of thousands of years before the pyramids or Stonehenge, the Earth experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the history of our species. The explosion came from what is now northern Sumatra in Indonesia. Today, the enormous crater left behind is filled by the beautiful waters of Lake Toba. Looking across its calm surface, it is difficult to imagine the unimaginable force that once reshaped this landscape. But beneath that peaceful lake lies evidence of an eruption so immense that scientists are still trying to understand its true impact. Some researchers believe it may have pushed humanity to the edge of extinction. Others argue that our ancestors proved far more resilient than once imagined. The debate has continued for decades, making the Toba supereruption one of prehistory's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. To understand why, it helps to appreciate its extraordinary scale. Volcanoes erupt regularly around the world. Most are local events. Even powerful eruptions typically affect only nearby regions. Toba was something entirely different. The eruption released thousands of cubic kilometers of volcanic material into the atmosphere. Ash spread across vast parts of Asia. Evidence of that ash has been identified thousands of kilometers from its source, preserved within lake sediments, caves, and ancient soils. For early human populations living across these landscapes, the eruption must have transformed the environment in ways that are difficult to imagine today. The sky may have darkened for extended periods. Vegetation in some areas would have been buried beneath layers of ash. Local ecosystems likely experienced enormous stress, yet the greatest mystery is not what happened during the eruption itself, it is what happened afterward. One of the earliest and most influential ideas became known as the population bottleneck hypothesis. The theory proposed something remarkable. According to this interpretation, the environmental consequences of the eruption became so severe that the global human population may have fallen to only a few thousand individuals, or perhaps even fewer. If true, nearly every person alive today would descend from a surprisingly small number of survivors. The idea attracted widespread attention because it appeared to explain another intriguing discovery. Modern humans possess relatively low genetic diversity compared with many other species. Some genetic studies suggested that our ancestors passed through a period when population numbers became dramatically reduced. Could Toba have caused that event? At first glance, the theory seemed compelling. A massive eruption, global environmental disruption, a small surviving human population. The pieces appeared to fit together. But science rarely accepts simple answers without careful testing. Researchers began examining archaeological sites that existed before and after the eruption. If the catastrophe had nearly eliminated humanity, evidence of human activity should become extremely rare immediately afterward. Instead, the archaeological record produced a far more complicated picture. Across parts of Africa, stone tool traditions appear surprisingly consistent through the period associated with the eruption. Rather than showing a sudden break in human occupation, some sites suggest communities continued living, hunting, and making tools. This did not necessarily mean the eruption had no effect. It suggested that its consequences may have differed dramatically depending on location. Distance from the volcano almost certainly mattered. Communities living closer to the eruption would have experienced much greater environmental disruption than those thousands of kilometers away. Climate also became a central focus of investigation. Large volcanic eruptions inject enormous quantities of tiny particles into the upper atmosphere. These particles can reflect sunlight back into space, temporarily cooling Earth's surface. Scientists have observed similar, though much smaller, effects following modern eruptions. The question is whether Toba produced cooling severe enough to transform global ecosystems for years or even decades. Climate models provide different answers depending on the assumptions used. Some simulations suggest substantial cooling across many regions. Others indicate more moderate changes. The exact duration and intensity remain uncertain. Again, evidence supports environmental disruption. The scale of that disruption continues to be debated. Ancient plant remains offer another perspective. Pollen preserved inside sediment layers reveals how vegetation changed before and after the eruption. In some regions, forests declined temporarily. Elsewhere, ecosystems appear surprisingly stable. This variation suggests the eruption's effects were not uniform across the planet. Some landscapes recovered relatively quickly. Others experienced much greater ecological stress. For prehistoric hunter-gatherers, adaptability was often the key to survival. Unlike later agricultural societies tied to permanent settlements, small mobile communities could sometimes respond to environmental change by relocating, altering hunting strategies, or exploiting different food resources. That flexibility may have been one of humanity's greatest strengths. Evidence increasingly suggests our ancestors possessed remarkable resilience. Stone tools found across Africa reveal continued technological development rather than widespread cultural collapse. Groups appear to have maintained sophisticated methods of producing blades, points, and cutting implements. Knowledge continued passing between generations. Innovation did not simply stop. This realization gradually shifted scientific thinking. Perhaps the question should not be whether humans nearly disappeared. Perhaps it should be how they managed to survive such extraordinary environmental uncertainty. Genetics also entered the discussion. Although many studies support the idea that human populations were once relatively small, linking that reduction directly to Toba has proven difficult. Population bottlenecks can result from numerous causes: climate fluctuations, migration patterns, geographic isolation, changing environments. Even ordinary demographic processes unfolding over thousands of years. Separating those possibilities remains one of evolutionary biology's greatest challenges. As genetic technology improved, researchers gained access to far more detailed information than earlier generations could imagine. Entire genomes could now be compared across populations from around the world. These studies painted an increasingly complex picture. Human history was not defined by one dramatic event. Instead, populations repeatedly expanded, separated, mixed, and migrated over immense periods of time. Within that broader story, Toba represents one important chapter, but perhaps not the only turning point. Another fascinating aspect of the mystery involves geography. Africa is often considered the primary homeland of modern humans during this period. If environmental impacts there proved less severe than originally proposed, populations might have survived in sufficient numbers to preserve cultural continuity while later expanding into other regions. Meanwhile, communities elsewhere may have experienced entirely different conditions. The eruption could therefore have had profound regional consequences, without necessarily threatening every human population equally. This regional perspective has become increasingly influential. Nature rarely affects every location in exactly the same way. Volcanic ash follows atmospheric circulation, rainfall varies, temperatures change differently across continents. Some ecosystems recover quickly, others require generations. Understanding those differences has become one of the most active areas of current research. Lake sediments provide another valuable source of evidence. Each year, tiny particles settle onto lake bottoms, gradually building layered records of environmental history. Within these layers, scientists identify volcanic ash, pollen, microscopic organisms, and chemical signatures that reveal changing climates. By comparing records from multiple lakes across different continents, researchers reconstruct a broader picture of Earth's response to the eruption. Once again, the evidence suggests complexity rather than simplicity. Some locations experienced noticeable environmental change. Others appear relatively unaffected. This variability helps explain why archaeologists continue uncovering evidence of persistent human occupation in several regions. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson from the Toba mystery concerns the resilience of our species. Early humans possessed no written language, no agriculture, no permanent cities, and no advanced technology. Yet they survived repeated environmental challenges through intelligence, cooperation, mobility, and adaptability. Small communities shared knowledge across generations. They understood animal behavior. They recognized edible plants. They crafted increasingly sophisticated tools from stone. Those skills may have been far more valuable than sheer numbers. Even if populations declined significantly in certain areas, surviving groups could gradually recover over thousands of years. That possibility reminds us that human history is rarely defined by single moments. It unfolds through countless decisions made by individuals responding to changing circumstances. Researchers continue searching for new evidence. Improved dating techniques refine eruption timelines. Fresh archaeological excavations reveal previously unknown settlements. Advanced climate simulations test competing hypotheses. Ancient DNA provides increasingly detailed insights into prehistoric population history. Each discovery sharpens the picture while leaving room for further questions. Did Toba nearly eliminate humanity? Current evidence suggests the answer is probably more nuanced than early theories proposed. The eruption was undoubtedly one of the greatest volcanic events our species has ever witnessed. Its environmental consequences were real. Its effects on ecosystems were significant. But whether it pushed humanity to the brink of extinction remains uncertain. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether humans survived. We clearly did. The deeper question is how scattered groups of hunter-gatherers managed to endure an event of such extraordinary magnitude. Their survival shaped every chapter of human history that followed, every civilization, every language, every culture. Every person alive today traces their ancestry through populations that navigated one of prehistory's greatest environmental challenges. The shores of Lake Toba appear peaceful now. Tourists admire the scenery. Fishermen cross quiet waters. The landscape gives little indication of its explosive past. Yet beneath that tranquil surface lies the silent reminder of an event that may have tested humanity more severely than almost any other natural disaster in our prehistoric journey. And despite decades of research, its full story has yet to be uncovered. The first Americans, the journey that rewrote human history for thousands of years, one question has stood at the center of American prehistory. Who were the first people to set foot in the Americas? At first, the question seems simple. Humans had already spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia long before reaching the Western Hemisphere. Eventually, someone crossed into a completely new world. But when? How? And perhaps most importantly, which route did they take? The answers have changed dramatically over the last century. In fact, every major discovery has forced archaeologists to rethink ideas that once seemed almost certain. Even today, the story remains unfinished. Unlike many historical mysteries, this one is not hidden inside ancient texts or forgotten ruins. It is buried beneath layers of soil, preserved in stone tools, ancient campsites, fragments of DNA, and landscapes that look completely different from the world our ancestors once knew. To understand the mystery, we must travel back to the end of the last ice age. Sea levels were much lower than they are today. Enormous amounts of Earth's water remained locked inside massive glaciers covering much of the northern hemisphere. Because so much water was frozen, coastlines looked very different. Entire regions now submerged beneath the ocean were once dry land. One of those vanished landscapes connected northeastern Asia and northwestern North America. Today, the narrow stretch of water between Siberia and Alaska is known as the Bering Strait. But during parts of the Ice Age, there was no strait at all. Instead, there existed a vast expanse of grassland, known as Beringia. Far from being a narrow land bridge, Beringia was a massive ecosystem stretching hundreds of kilometers across. Herds of mammoths, bison, horses, and other Ice Age animals wandered its open plains, creating an environment capable of supporting human communities. For many years, archaeologists believed this explained everything. Small groups of hunter-gatherers gradually followed migrating animals across Beringia. Eventually, they entered North America. Then, after the glaciers retreated, they spread southward through an ice-free corridor into the rest of the continent. This explanation became known as the Clovis First model. It dominated archaeology for decades. The reason seemed convincing. Across North America, archaeologists repeatedly discovered beautifully crafted stone spear points with distinctive fluted bases. These became known as Clovis points, named after the town of Clovis, New Mexico, where some of the first examples were identified. Radiocarbon dating suggested these tools were around 13,000 years old. Because no older, widely accepted archaeological sites were known at the time, researchers concluded that Clovis people represented the continent's earliest inhabitants. It was a clean, logical explanation, until new discoveries complicated the picture. As archaeologists explored additional sites, evidence slowly began emerging that appeared older than Clovis. At first, these discoveries were controversial. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Many researchers questioned the dating methods, excavation techniques, or interpretation of the artifacts. But as more sites were investigated, the pattern became increasingly difficult to ignore. Several locations suggested that humans occupied parts of the Americas before Clovis technology appeared. If those findings were correct, the traditional timeline needed revision. One of the most influential discoveries came from southern Chile. There, archaeologists uncovered evidence of a prehistoric settlement remarkably far from the Bering Strait. The site contained preserved wooden structures, plant remains, stone tools, and other traces of human activity. Radiocarbon dating indicated an age older than Clovis. Its location created another puzzle. If people had already reached the southern part of South America by that time, they must have entered the continent much earlier than previously believed. That realization sparked an entirely new question. If the interior ice-free corridor was not yet fully open, how had these early people traveled so far south? One increasingly influential idea points toward the Pacific coastline. During the Ice Age, coastal environments looked very different. Sea levels were lower, exposing broad coastal plains now submerged beneath the ocean. Groups traveling along these shorelines may have moved gradually by combining walking with short journeys across protected coastal waters. Marine resources such as fish, shellfish, and sea mammals could have provided reliable food supplies. The challenge is that much of this ancient coastline now lies underwater. If early campsites existed there, many are submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean, making them extremely difficult to study. This creates one of archaeology's greatest frustrations. Some of the most important evidence may simply be inaccessible. Every rise in sea level erased portions of humanity's earliest coastal history. Meanwhile, genetics introduced another powerful line of evidence. Advances in ancient DNA transformed the study of prehistoric migrations. Instead of relying solely on stone tools, researchers could now examine relationships between ancient populations directly. Genetic studies strongly support an ancestral connection between indigenous peoples of the Americas and populations from northeastern Asia. This confirms that the earliest Americans ultimately came from Asian ancestors. But genetics also revealed something unexpected. The migration was probably not one simple journey. Instead of a single wave of people moving into an empty continent, evidence increasingly suggests multiple movements, periods of isolation, and later population expansions. Human migration rarely follows straight lines. Groups separate. Some remain isolated for generations. Others continue exploring. Still others meet and exchange knowledge. The peopling of the Americas appears to have followed that same complex pattern. Another mystery concerns timing. Exactly when do the first people arrive? The answer continues to shift as dating techniques improve. Some archaeological sites suggest occupation more than 15,000 years ago. Others propose even earlier dates, though these remain subjects of active scientific debate. Researchers approach such claims cautiously. Ancient stone fragments can sometimes resemble tools created naturally. Animal bones may be moved by geological processes. Dating ancient sediments presents its own challenges. Each new site must withstand intense scrutiny before becoming widely accepted. That careful skepticism is essential. It protects archaeology from drawing conclusions based on incomplete evidence. Still, the growing number of early sites has changed scientific opinion considerably. Today, many researchers agree that human presence in the Americas likely predates the Clovis culture. Exactly how much earlier remains uncertain. The mystery extends beyond migration routes. How did these early communities adapt so successfully to unfamiliar environments? Within a relatively short span of time, humans occupied Arctic tundra, dense forests, open grasslands, mountain ranges, deserts, tropical rainforests, and coastal ecosystems. Such rapid environmental adaptation demonstrates extraordinary flexibility. Stone tool technologies evolved to match local conditions. Hunting strategies changed depending on available animals. Communities learned to exploit rivers, lakes, coastlines, and forests using knowledge passed carefully between generations. Far from wandering aimlessly across new landscapes, these people became skilled observers of the natural world. Every season brought different opportunities. Every ecosystem demanded new solutions. Archaeological discoveries continue revealing the sophistication of these early populations. Stone points became increasingly specialized. Grinding stones appear in some regions. Evidence of long-distance movement suggests remarkable geographic knowledge. Some communities transported high-quality stone across considerable distances to produce superior tools. Such decisions required planning. They reflected careful understanding of both landscapes and resources. Another fascinating question concerns communication. How did knowledge spread across enormous territories? Did neighboring groups exchange ideas? Were there networks through which information traveled over generations? Stone tool similarities between distant regions hint that cultural traditions sometimes extended far beyond individual campsites. Exactly how those connections functioned remains unknown. The archaeological record offers glimpses rather than complete stories. Perhaps the greatest challenge facing researchers is preservation. The earliest camps were often temporary. People built shelters from wood, animal hides, and other natural materials that rarely survive thousands of years. Only durable object stone tools, occasional bones, hearths, and traces of ancient fires remain. Entire generations may have lived without leaving evidence capable of surviving to the present. That reality reminds us how incomplete our understanding truly is. Each archaeological discovery represents only a tiny fraction of prehistoric life. Millions of journeys left no trace. Countless camps disappeared beneath rivers, forests, coastlines, or glaciers. Yet even these fragments reveal remarkable resilience. The first Americans crossed landscapes unlike anything their ancestors had previously known. They encountered unfamiliar climates, new animals, and vast unexplored territories. Rather than retreating, they adapted. They learned. They continued moving forward. Their descendants eventually occupied nearly every corner of 2 continents. Today, new technologies continue reshaping the story. Ancient DNA provides increasingly detailed family relationships. Improved radiocarbon dating refines archaeological timelines. Remote sensing identifies buried sites hidden beneath vegetation. Underwater archaeology begins exploring drowned Ice Age coastlines. Every advance brings new clues. Sometimes they answer old questions. More often, they reveal new mysteries waiting to be explored. Perhaps that is why the first peopling of the Americas remains one of prehistory's greatest unsolved stories. We understand far more than researchers did 50 years ago. Yet the central mystery continues evolving. Exactly when did the journey begin? Which routes proved most important? How many migrations occurred? What stories were shared around campfires as families crossed landscapes no human had ever seen before? The answers are still emerging. Hidden beneath ancient riverbanks, submerged coastlines, frozen caves, and forgotten valleys are discoveries that may one day transform our understanding once again. Until then, the first footsteps into the Americas remain not just a story of migration, but a testament to humanity's endless curiosity, resilience, and willingness to venture beyond every known horizon. The mystery of human intelligence. When did we truly become human? Imagine standing beside a campfire nearly 100,000 years ago. The flames crackle in the darkness. A group of people sits together after a successful hunt. Someone shapes a stone blade with remarkable precision. Another carefully repairs a spear. Children watch, learning skills they will one day pass to their own families. At first glance, the scene feels surprisingly familiar. Yet, one question remains impossible to answer with complete certainty. What were they thinking? Did they imagine the future? Did they remember the distant past? Did they tell stories beneath the stars? Did they dream about tomorrow? These questions lie at the heart of one of prehistory's greatest mysteries, the origin of human intelligence. Unlike bones or stone tools, thoughts do not fossilize. Ideas leave no direct imprint in the archaeological record. Scientists can uncover skulls, campsites, ornaments, and ancient footprints, but the inner world of our ancestors remains hidden behind thousands of generations. Even so, archaeology has revealed remarkable clues that allow researchers to piece together how human intelligence gradually evolved. The story begins long before modern humans appeared. For millions of years, different human ancestors adapted to changing environments across Africa and later Eurasia. Their brains slowly increased in size. But intelligence is not simply a matter of brain volume. An elephant's brain is larger than ours. Some whales possess even greater brain mass. What matters is how the brain is organized, how different regions communicate, and how individuals use knowledge to solve problems. That is far more difficult to measure in extinct species. The earliest clues come from stone tools. Some of the oldest known tools are surprisingly simple, sharp flakes created by striking one stone against another. Even producing these basic implements required planning. The toolmaker needed to recognize suitable rock, understand how it would fracture, and shape it into a useful cutting edge. That may sound straightforward today, but it represents an important cognitive achievement. It shows the ability to imagine an object before it exists. As hundreds of thousands of years passed, toolmaking became increasingly sophisticated. Hand axes emerged with remarkably symmetrical shapes. Later, prehistoric people learned to prepare stone cores so that carefully planned flakes could be removed in predictable ways. This required memory, precision, and the ability to think several steps ahead. A mistake made early in the process could ruin the final tool. Each improvement reflected more than technological progress. It revealed increasingly advanced ways of thinking. Planning became longer. Problem-solving became more flexible. Knowledge became more valuable. Another clue comes from hunting itself. Large Ice Age animals could not usually be captured by strength alone. Successful hunts demanded cooperation. Groups needed to communicate, anticipate animal behavior, and coordinate their movements. Some individuals likely specialized in tracking. Others prepared weapons. Still others may have directed the hunt itself. Such cooperation required trust. It required shared understanding. Most importantly, it required communication. Exactly how prehistoric humans communicated remains uncertain. Modern language leaves almost no archaeological evidence. Words disappear the moment they are spoken. No fossil preserves conversations held 50,000 years ago. Yet indirect clues suggest increasingly sophisticated communication. Complex hunting strategies are difficult to organize without detailed information. Knowledge about seasons, migration routes, edible plants, and dangerous animals had to be passed between generations. Some system of communication clearly existed. Whether it resembled modern language remains one of science's greatest unanswered questions. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when symbolic behavior enters the archaeological record. Across different regions of the world, researchers have discovered objects that appear to carry meaning beyond simple survival. Pieces of red ochre show signs of deliberate use. Shells were collected from distant coastlines and transported inland. Animal teeth were carefully modified into ornaments. Some objects appear to have been chosen for beauty rather than practical function. These discoveries suggest something extraordinary. Humans were beginning to think symbolically. A necklace serves no obvious survival purpose. Pigment does not help catch food. Decoration represents something deeper: identity, root membership, status, memory, belief. Exactly what these objects meant remains unknown. But their existence demonstrates that prehistoric people increasingly interacted with the world in abstract ways. Art provides another remarkable window into the human mind. Some of the world's oldest cave paintings display astonishing technical skill. Animals appear with careful attention to movement and anatomy. Hands are outlined against stone walls. Geometric signs accompany many images. The purpose of this art remains uncertain. Perhaps it played a role in ceremonies. Perhaps it simply reflected creativity. Whatever the explanation, artistic expression required imagination. An artist first pictured something mentally, only then could it be transferred onto stone. That ability to transform ideas into physical objects represents one of humanity's defining characteristics. Yet another mystery concerns innovation. For long periods, prehistoric technologies changed very slowly. Then, at certain moments, innovation accelerated dramatically. New tool types appeared. Materials were combined in increasingly sophisticated ways. Bone, antler, wood, and stone were shaped together to create more effective equipment. What caused these bursts of creativity? One possibility involves growing population sizes. Larger communities allow ideas to spread more rapidly. Innovations discovered by one group can gradually reach others through contact and exchange. Knowledge accumulates rather than disappearing when individuals die. This process creates cumulative culture. Unlike most other animals, humans do not simply inherit genes, they inherit ideas. Every generation builds upon previous discoveries. Fire offers another example of intelligence extending beyond immediate survival. Controlling fire required more than simply collecting burning branches. People needed to gather fuel, protect flames from weather, and perhaps eventually learn how to create fire deliberately. Once mastered, fire transformed nearly every aspect of life. Food became easier to digest. Cold regions became habitable. Predators became less threatening. Nighttime became an opportunity for social interaction rather than inactivity. Many anthropologists believe evenings around shared fires may have encouraged storytelling, teaching, and stronger social relationships. Although direct evidence for those conversations no longer exists, their influence may have shaped the development of human culture itself. Memory also played an increasingly important role. Hunter-gatherers depended upon detailed knowledge of enormous territories. They remembered seasonal water sources, animal migration routes, safe shelters, locations of edible plants, changes in weather patterns. Such information accumulated over years of observation. Without writing, everything depended on memory and communication. Every experienced elder represented a living library. Losing that knowledge could affect an entire community. Social intelligence became equally important. Humans rarely survive alone. Living in groups requires cooperation, negotiation, conflict resolution, and mutual assistance. Understanding another person's intentions, predicting behavior, recognizing emotions, and maintaining relationships all involve sophisticated cognitive abilities. Some researchers argue that these social challenges may have driven the evolution of increasingly complex human intelligence. Managing relationships can be just as demanding as solving physical problems. The archaeological record also suggests growing long-distance connections between communities. Stone from distant quarries appears hundreds of kilometers away. Marine shells reach inland settlements. Similar technologies spread across vast regions. These patterns imply networks through which materials and perhaps ideas moved between groups. Knowledge no longer remained isolated within single communities. It traveled. That exchange likely accelerated innovation and strengthened cultural traditions. Yet despite these remarkable developments, one profound mystery remains. When exactly did modern human intelligence emerge? There is no universally accepted moment. Some researchers argue that advanced cognition evolved gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. Others suggest certain breakthroughs occurred relatively rapidly once brains reached sufficient complexity. Still others believe intelligence has always existed along a continuum rather than appearing suddenly. Current evidence supports gradual change. Different cognitive abilities likely evolved at different times: planning, language, symbolic thought, creativity, social cooperation. Each may have followed its own evolutionary path before combining into the extraordinary flexibility characteristic of modern humans. Perhaps the greatest challenge is recognizing intelligence without imposing modern expectations. Ancient hunter-gatherers did not build skyscrapers or computers, but surviving prehistoric environments required astonishing observational skills, reading animal tracks invisible to untrained eyes, predicting seasonal changes, creating effective tools from raw stone, navigating unfamiliar landscapes without maps, understanding hundreds of edible and medicinal plants. These achievements reflect forms of intelligence perfectly adapted to their world. Modern technology often obscures how demanding such knowledge truly was. Today, advances in neuroscience, archaeology, genetics, and anthropology continue adding new pieces to the puzzle. Brain evolution is studied through fossil skulls. Ancient DNA reveals genetic changes associated with neural development. Experimental archaeology recreates prehistoric technologies to understand the cognitive skills required. Computer models explore how cooperation influences innovation. Each discipline contributes valuable insights. None yet provides a complete answer. Perhaps that is fitting. Human intelligence gave rise to science itself. The very minds attempting to solve this mystery are products of the evolutionary process they seek to understand. Our curiosity is not separate from the story, it is part of it. Somewhere in the distant past, a series of small changes accumulated across countless generations. No single individual suddenly became fully modern. Instead, thousands of incremental improvements in memory, communication, creativity, cooperation, and imagination gradually transformed our ancestors into a species capable of asking questions about its own origins. That may be the most extraordinary development of all. Long before history was written, before kingdoms rose or monuments were built, the human mind began evolving into something unique. It became capable not only of surviving the world, but of wondering about it. And tens of thousands of years later, that same curiosity continues driving every archaeological excavation, every scientific discovery, and every search for the answers still hidden within our prehistoric past. The birth of language, humanity's greatest invisible invention. Every civilization in history has depended on language. Empires were built with it. Knowledge was preserved through it. Families passed stories from one generation to the next because of it. Every scientific discovery, every piece of music, every law, and every culture has relied on one extraordinary ability: the power to communicate complex ideas. Yet one of the greatest inventions in human history left behind almost no physical evidence. Unlike stone tools, language does not fossilize. Unlike pottery or ancient buildings, spoken words disappear the moment they are heard. This makes the origin of language one of prehistory's most difficult mysteries. Scientists know that language exists. They know it transformed humanity forever. What they still cannot determine with certainty is exactly when it began or how. The mystery starts with a simple observation. Humans are not the only creatures that communicate. Birds sing. Whales produce intricate vocal patterns that travel for hundreds of kilometers through the ocean. Wolves coordinate hunts using vocal calls and body language. Chimpanzees warn one another about danger using different sounds for different predators. Communication is widespread throughout nature. Language, however, is something entirely different. Human language allows us to describe things that are not present. We can talk about yesterday. We can plan tomorrow. We can imagine places we have never seen. We can invent stories, explain ideas, ask questions, and describe completely imaginary worlds. That level of symbolic communication appears unique. Somewhere in prehistory, our ancestors crossed a threshold that no other known species has reached. Exactly when that happened remains one of archaeology's greatest unanswered questions. The challenge is obvious. Imagine trying to discover when music was invented without hearing a single note. That is essentially the problem scientists face. There are no recordings, no written conversations, no preserved speeches. Researchers must rely entirely on indirect evidence. One clue comes from anatomy. Modern humans possess physical features that support complex speech. The tongue, lips, vocal tract, and especially the larynx all contribute to producing a wide range of sounds. The shape of the skull also influences how those sounds are formed. Fossils allow scientists to study some of these structures, but not all. Soft tissues rarely survive for tens of thousands of years. Instead, researchers examine the bones surrounding the vocal system. One particularly important bone is the hyoid. Although small, it helps support muscles involved in speech and swallowing. Several ancient human fossils preserve hyoid bones remarkably similar to those of modern people. This discovery suggests that at least some prehistoric humans possess the anatomical capability for advanced vocal communication, but anatomy alone cannot solve the mystery. Having the physical ability to speak does not necessarily mean language already existed in its modern form. The brain is equally important. Language requires extraordinary coordination between memory, hearing, reasoning, and motor control. Ideas must be organized into meaningful sequences. Listeners must understand not only individual words, but relationships between them. Grammar transforms sounds into thoughts. Unfortunately, brains do not fossilize either. Researchers therefore search for indirect signs of increasingly sophisticated cognition. Stone tools provide one such clue. As prehistoric technologies became more complex, teaching those skills likely became more demanding. Creating advanced tools often involves dozens of carefully ordered steps. Passing that knowledge entirely through observation would be difficult. Detailed verbal instruction would greatly improve learning. Although impossible to prove directly, many researchers believe technological complexity and language probably evolved together. The same pattern appears in hunting. Imagine organizing a hunt involving 20 people. Everyone must understand where to wait, when to move, which direction animals are expected to travel, and how to respond if conditions change. Simple vocal signals might coordinate basic actions, but flexible planning benefits enormously from richer communication. Language allows groups to discuss possibilities before events occur. It makes preparation more effective. Another fascinating clue comes from long-distance cooperation. Archaeological evidence shows that prehistoric communities exchanged stone, shells, pigments, and other materials across surprisingly large regions. These interactions required more than chance encounters. People needed ways to establish trust, share information, negotiate exchanges, and maintain relationships. Language may have made those increasingly complex social networks possible. Stories also enter the picture. Unlike instructions for making tools, stories preserve knowledge in memorable forms. A tale about dangerous rivers can protect future generations. A story explaining seasonal animal movements helps young hunters prepare. Legends may preserve valuable environmental information while strengthening group identity. Many anthropologists believe storytelling became one of humanity's most powerful survival tools. Even today, people remember stories more easily than lists of facts. Perhaps prehistoric communities discovered the same advantage. Another remarkable development involves symbolic thought. Around the world, archaeologists have uncovered cave paintings, carved figurines, engraved stones, beads, and carefully prepared pigments. These objects demonstrate that prehistoric humans increasingly expressed ideas through symbols. Language itself is symbolic. Words represent objects without physically resembling them. The spoken word river is not a river. Its meaning exists because communities agree upon it. This ability to assign abstract meaning lies at the heart of language. The appearance of symbolic artifacts therefore suggests that human minds were becoming increasingly capable of abstract communication. Still, uncertainty remains. Did symbolic art appear after language had already developed, or did both evolve together? No one knows. The archaeological timeline provides hints rather than certainty. Genetics offers another perspective. Researchers have identified genes associated with speech and language development. One of the most widely studied influences neural systems involved in controlling complex movements required for speaking. Versions of this gene appear not only in modern humans, but also in Neanderthals. This intriguing discovery suggests that at least some components necessary for sophisticated vocal communication evolved earlier than once believed. However, genes alone do not create language. Culture, learning, and social interaction remain equally essential. Children are not born speaking. Language develops through communication with others. That realization highlights another mystery. How did the first true language emerge? One possibility imagines gradual expansion. Early vocal calls became increasingly varied. Simple signals evolved into combinations. Combinations developed into structured expressions. Over countless generations, communication became richer, eventually reaching the flexibility of modern language. Another idea proposes that once human brains reached sufficient complexity, language expanded relatively rapidly. Small innovations in grammar or symbolic thinking could have dramatically increased communication efficiency. Both possibilities remain actively discussed. Neither has been proven. Researchers also debate whether language first appeared among modern humans alone. Neanderthals possessed sophisticated tools, cared for injured individuals, and perhaps created symbolic objects. Some anatomical evidence suggests they were physically capable of producing many speech sounds. If so, they may have possessed forms of language more advanced than previously imagined. Without recordings, however, certainty remains impossible. The mystery extends beyond words themselves. Language changes how people think. It allows individuals to discuss plans months in advance, to explain invisible concepts, to imagine futures that do not yet exist, to teach children using experiences they have never personally witnessed. Knowledge no longer depends entirely upon individual discovery. It becomes cumulative. Every generation inherits the experiences of those before it. This accumulation of information may represent humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. Instead of beginning from nothing, each generation starts where the previous one ended. Civilizations become possible because language preserves ideas across time. Even without writing, world traditions can survive astonishingly long periods. Some indigenous communities preserve environmental knowledge passed down across countless generations. This demonstrates the extraordinary power of spoken culture. Long before books existed, language served as humanity's first library. Today, scientists continue investigating the mystery using remarkable new techniques. Computer models explore how languages evolve. Neuroscientists examine how the brain processes speech. Anthropologists compare communication across modern cultures. Archaeologists analyze symbolic artifacts. Geneticists investigate ancient DNA. Each field contributes another piece to a puzzle that remains incomplete. Perhaps that incompleteness is unavoidable. The first conversation may never be identified. The earliest sentence may never be reconstructed. The first story told around an ancient fire has almost certainly vanished forever, yet its influence remains everywhere. Every question we ask, every discovery we celebrate, every lesson we teach, every documentary we create, all depend upon the invisible invention born somewhere in prehistory. Language transformed isolated individuals into communities, communities into cultures, cultures into civilizations. It allowed knowledge to outlive those who first discovered it. That single achievement reshaped human history more profoundly than any monument or empire ever could. And despite decades of research, we still do not know exactly when humanity first found its voice. Perhaps the answer lies buried within fossils not yet discovered, ancient genetic clues not yet understood, or archaeological sites still hidden beneath layers of earth. Until then, the origin of language remains one of the greatest mysteries ever spoken about, and one that, fittingly, can only be explored through words themselves. The first friend, how did wolves become dogs? Thousands of years before the first forms appeared, Before cities rose from the earth, before written history, a remarkable partnership began. It did not start between two human civilizations. It did not involve trade, conquest, or technology. Instead, it began between two predators. One was human, the other was the gray wolf. Today, dogs are found in nearly every corner of the world. They guide, protect, hunt, rescue, comfort, and accompany millions of people. Their relationship with humanity feels so natural that it is difficult to imagine a world without them. Yet that relationship had to begin somewhere. At some point in prehistory, wolves stopped being simply wild animals. Gradually, over many generations, they became something entirely new. The first domestic dogs. Exactly how that transformation happened remains one of archaeology's most fascinating mysteries. Unlike many prehistoric questions, scientists know that domestication occurred. The uncertainty lies in understanding when it happened, where it began, and perhaps most importantly, why it happened at all. The traditional picture is easy to imagine. Early hunters captured wolf pups from nearby dens, raised them, and slowly bred the friendliest animals until dogs eventually emerged. For many years, this explanation appeared reasonable, but modern research has revealed that the story is probably much more complicated. Domestication rarely follows a simple plan, especially in prehistory. To understand why wolves became humanity's closest animal companions, we must first understand the world they shared. Late Ice Age landscapes were home to both humans and wolves. Both hunted many of the same animals. Both lived in organized social groups. Both relied heavily on cooperation. Both raised young within close family structures. In many ways, humans and wolves occupied remarkably similar ecological roles. This similarity may have been the foundation of everything that followed. Some researchers believe the earliest stages of domestication may not have been intentional at all. Imagine a prehistoric hunting camp after a successful day. Small scraps of meat and discarded bones remain near the edge of the settlement. Most wild animals avoid approaching humans, but occasionally, a few wolves may have been slightly less fearful than others. Those cautious but curious individuals gained access to an easy source of food. Generation after generation, the least aggressive wolves may have spent more time near human camps. The boldest animals probably came too close and frightened people. The most fearful remained deep in the wilderness. The individuals that survived and reproduced successfully were those whose behavior balanced caution with curiosity. Over hundreds or perhaps thousands of years, natural selection could gradually favor wolves that tolerated human presence. Eventually, these populations may have become genetically and behaviorally different from their fully wild relatives. This idea is known as the self-domestication hypothesis. It suggests that humans did not deliberately create dogs in the beginning. Instead, wolves slowly adapted to living alongside people. Only later did humans begin recognizing the advantages of this unusual relationship. Those advantages were considerable. Dogs possess extraordinary senses. Their hearing detects sounds beyond human perception. Their sense of smell is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom. They notice approaching predators. They locate prey. They track scents over enormous distances. For prehistoric hunters, such abilities would have been invaluable. Meanwhile, wolves also gained important benefits. Humans provided food, protection from larger predators, access to reliable campsites. Over time, cooperation became increasingly beneficial for both species. Few relationships in nature demonstrate such powerful mutual advantage. Archaeology offers several clues about when this partnership began. Ancient dog-like remains have been discovered at sites dating back many thousands of years. Some skeletons appear carefully buried, suggesting these animals held significance beyond practical usefulness. One remarkable burial contains both a human and a dog placed together. Although interpretations vary, discoveries like these hint at emotional relationships developing surprisingly early. Dogs may have become companions as well as working animals. Yet identifying the earliest dogs is not straightforward. Ancient wolves and early dogs often looked remarkably similar. Body size alone is unreliable. Skull shape gradually changed over many generations. Some fossils possess characteristics falling somewhere between wolves and modern dogs. Researchers continue debating exactly where the line should be drawn. genetics has transformed this investigation. By comparing DNA from living dogs, wolves, and ancient remains, scientists reconstruct relationships stretching back tens of thousands of years. The results have revealed an unexpectedly complex history. Rather than pointing clearly toward one place or one moment, genetic evidence suggests multiple ancient wolf populations contributed to the ancestry of modern dogs. Some early domesticated lineages may even have disappeared entirely. The dogs living today are survivors of a much larger prehistoric story. Another mystery concerns geography. Where did domestication first occur? Several regions have been proposed: Eastern Asia, Central Asia, Europe, the Middle East. Each possesses archaeological or genetic evidence supporting different aspects of the debate. No single location has achieved universal agreement. It remains entirely possible that early interactions between humans and wolves occurred independently in more than one region, before later populations mixed together. This possibility reminds us that prehistory rarely follows neat boundaries. Human groups moved, wolf populations moved, climate changed, landscapes transformed. Interactions likely occurred across enormous territories over thousands of years. Behavioral changes accompanied physical ones. Compared with wolves, dogs gradually developed shorter snouts, smaller teeth, reduced aggression, and increased willingness to communicate with humans. Perhaps most remarkably, dogs became exceptionally skilled at reading human social cues. Modern dogs often understand pointing gestures more effectively than even some of our closest primate relatives. They make eye contact, they interpret facial expressions, they respond to tone of voice. These abilities appear to have developed through thousands of years of shared evolution. Humans changed dogs. Dogs also changed humans. Hunting strategies likely became more efficient. Security improved. Early warning against predators became possible. Companionship may have reduced social isolation within small communities. As agriculture eventually emerged, dogs adapted once again. They guarded livestock, protected settlements, helped manage herds. Their role expanded alongside human civilization. This extraordinary flexibility explains why dogs succeeded in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical forests. They evolved not simply alongside humans, but with them. Researchers continue uncovering fascinating details through ancient DNA. By sequencing genetic material from prehistoric dogs, scientists trace migrations that mirror human movement across continents. Dogs accompanied people into new landscapes. As communities spread, so did their companions. The partnership became one of the most enduring relationships in natural history. Still, important questions remain unanswered. Exactly when did wolves first begin approaching human camps? How long did domestication require? Did ancient people consciously recognize the process unfolding before them? Or did meaningful changes become visible only after countless generations? Another intriguing possibility concerns communication. Successful cooperation between humans and dogs requires understanding, not shared language, but shared signals, gestures, expressions, vocal tones, mutual attention. The foundations of that communication were established long before written history. They continue today whenever a dog responds to its owner's voice or gaze. Perhaps the greatest lesson of domestication is that it was not built through force alone. Aggressive wolves would have struggled to remain near people. Similarly, humans unwilling to tolerate nearby animals would have prevented close relationships from developing. Trust evolved gradually. Each generation strengthened a partnership benefiting both species. Few events in prehistory had such lasting consequences. Modern civilization still depends upon dogs in countless ways. Search and rescue teams rely on their remarkable sense of smell. Conservationists use dogs to locate endangered wildlife. Medical researchers study their ability to detect certain diseases. Families around the world consider them trusted companions. Every one of these relationships traces its origins back to those first cautious encounters between humans and wolves during the Ice Age. The remarkable aspect of this story is not simply that wolves became dogs. It is that two intelligent predators discovered cooperation was more powerful than competition. Somewhere beneath prehistoric skies, around forgotten campfires, that realization slowly transformed both species. Yet despite decades of archaeological excavation and genetic research, the beginning of that friendship remains hidden behind thousands of generations. The first wolf that approached a human camp left no written record. The first human who chose not to chase it away never imagined history was changing. Together, they began one of the longest and most extraordinary partnerships the world has ever known. And even today, every loyal dog quietly reminds us of a prehistoric mystery that science is still working to fully understand. Consciousness, the greatest prehistoric mystery of all. Every mystery in prehistory asks a question about the past. When did humans first reach the Americas? Why did the Neanderthals disappear? How did language begin? What caused the great Ice Age extinctions? But there is one mystery unlike any other. It is not hidden beneath layers of ancient soil. It cannot be uncovered with a shovel. It leaves no fossils. It cannot be measured directly by archaeology. And yet it shaped every decision our ancestors ever made. That mystery is consciousness. What does it actually mean to be aware? At some point in prehistory, our ancestors were no longer simply reacting to the world around them. They began reflecting on it. They could remember the distant past, imagine the future, recognize themselves as individuals, wonder why the stars moved across the night sky, question life, perhaps even question death. Exactly when this transformation occurred remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in science. Unlike bones or stone tools, consciousness leaves almost no direct evidence. A skull can reveal the size of a brain. A campsite can reveal how people lived. A carved object can hint at symbolic thinking. But none of these discoveries tells us what another individual actually experienced. Did they feel hope? Did they dream? Did they imagine worlds beyond the one they could see? These questions sit at the boundary between archaeology, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and evolutionary biology. Each field offers clues, none possesses the complete answer. The mystery begins with a simple observation. Human beings do far more than survive. We tell stories, we create music, we paint, we ask questions that have no immediate practical benefit. We wonder about our place in the universe. From an evolutionary perspective, this is extraordinary. Finding food or avoiding danger offers clear survival advantages. But why develop the ability to contemplate existence itself? Some researchers argue that consciousness gradually emerged as brains became more complex. Over millions of years, human ancestors evolved increasingly sophisticated nervous systems capable of processing larger amounts of information. Memory improved. Planning became more detailed. Social relationships grew increasingly complicated. Eventually, these cognitive abilities may have combined to create self-awareness. Rather than appearing suddenly, consciousness may have developed step by step over countless generations. Others believe the story is even more complicated. Perhaps consciousness exists on a spectrum rather than as an all-or-nothing ability. Many animals clearly demonstrate awareness of their surroundings. They solve problems. They recognize familiar individuals. They communicate. Some species even appear capable of planning ahead. Modern chimpanzees manufacture simple tools. Elephants recognize themselves in mirrors under certain experimental conditions. Crows solve surprisingly complex puzzles. Dolphins display remarkable social intelligence. If awareness exists in varying degrees throughout nature, then the question changes. Instead of asking when consciousness appeared, scientists begin asking when human consciousness became uniquely human. That distinction is far more difficult to define. One possible clue comes from burial practices. Archaeologists have discovered prehistoric graves dating back tens of thousands of years. Some individuals were carefully placed in prepared resting places. Others appeared to have been buried alongside ornaments, tools, pigments, or flowers, although some interpretations remain debated. These discoveries raise fascinating possibilities. Did prehistoric humans understand death as more than a biological event? Did they believe individuals continued in some form after life ended? Or were these simply expressions of memory, respect, or social tradition? The archaeological record cannot answer these questions directly. Yet the existence of intentional burials suggests that death carried meaning beyond the immediate practical problem of disposing of a body. Meaning itself is deeply connected to consciousness. Art provides another intriguing window into the ancient mind. Cave paintings created tens of thousands of years ago continue to astonish modern viewers. Animals appear with remarkable movement and detail. Hands are preserved as silhouettes against stone walls. Abstract symbols accompany many compositions. Why create such images? Some researchers believe they served ceremonial purposes. Others suggest they recorded important knowledge or expressed cultural identity. Perhaps they fulfilled several functions simultaneously. Regardless of their exact purpose, these paintings required imagination. The artist first envisioned something mentally before bringing it into the physical world. That ability to transform invisible thoughts into visible creations remains one of humanity's defining characteristics. Memory also plays a central role in understanding consciousness. Every prehistoric community depended upon accumulated knowledge. Experienced hunters remembered migration routes. Gatherers recognized edible plants across changing seasons. Elders preserved stories explaining landscapes, weather, and survival strategies. Without writing, memory became the foundation of culture. But consciousness extends beyond remembering. It also involves imagining. Humans routinely picture events that have never happened. A hunter plans tomorrow's journey before sunrise. Parents imagine their children's future. Artists envision paintings before touching stone. Inventors mentally construct tools before shaping them. This capacity to simulate possible futures may have offered enormous evolutionary advantages. It allows mistakes to be considered before they occur. Danger can be anticipated. Opportunities can be recognized. Perhaps one of consciousness's greatest strengths is its ability to prepare for worlds that do not yet exist. Language almost certainly expanded these abilities. Thoughts shared through conversation become collective rather than individual. One person's experience benefits an entire group. Ideas evolve through discussion. Questions generate new discoveries. Knowledge accumulates across generations. Consciousness becomes something larger than a single mind. It becomes culture. Yet despite these remarkable developments, scientists still cannot explain exactly how consciousness arises. Neuroscience has identified brain regions associated with perception, memory, attention, and decision-making. Electrical activity can be measured. Neural networks can be mapped. Individual brain cells can be mapped. But none of these discoveries fully explain subjective experience. Why does the activity of billions of neurons produce awareness? How do electrical signals become thoughts? Why do emotions feel the way they do? These questions remain among the greatest challenges in modern science. The prehistoric perspective makes the mystery even deeper. Every archaeological discovery represents only external behavior. Stone tools show planning. Burials suggest symbolism. Art demonstrates imagination. But inner experience remains hidden. Two individuals could create identical tools while experiencing completely different thoughts. The archaeological record cannot distinguish between them. This limitation reminds us that some aspects of prehistory may always remain partially unknowable. Even so, researchers continue searching for indirect evidence. Studies comparing modern human brains with ancient DNA investigate genes involved in neural development. Anthropologists examine how social complexity influences cognitive evolution. Psychologists explore the relationship between language and thought. Computer scientists build models attempting to understand how intelligence emerges from interconnected systems. Each discipline approaches consciousness from a different direction. Together, they gradually illuminate pieces of an extraordinarily difficult puzzle. Another fascinating question concerns imagination itself. At what point did humans begin wondering about things they could never directly observe? The changing seasons, the movement of stars, dreams experienced during sleep, the origins of life, natural disasters. Ancient people certainly observed these events. Whether they reflected upon them in ways comparable to modern thought remains uncertain. Yet curiosity itself may be one of consciousness's defining characteristics. Humans seek explanations even when immediate survival is not at stake. That impulse drove exploration across continents. It inspired artistic expression. It eventually gave rise to philosophy, science, and history. In many ways, every archaeological excavation represents consciousness studying its own origins. Modern researchers ask questions because prehistoric humans first developed minds capable of asking questions themselves. That connection stretches across tens of thousands of years. It links every generation through shared curiosity. Perhaps the most remarkable realization is that consciousness transformed evolution itself. Most species adapt primarily through genetic change. Humans increasingly adapted through ideas. Knowledge spread faster than biological evolution. A useful innovation could travel across communities within generations rather than millennia. Culture became an evolutionary force. Learning became as important as inheritance. Consciousness made that possible. It allowed humanity to reshape environments rather than simply respond to them. Yet, despite all our scientific progress, the deepest mystery remains. We can reconstruct ancient climates from microscopic pollen. We can recover DNA from fossils tens of thousands of years old. We can identify forgotten human relatives from fragments of bone. But we still cannot fully explain how awareness itself emerged. Somewhere in prehistory, countless small changes accumulated. Memory became richer. Communication became more sophisticated. Imagination expanded. Social relationships deepened. Curiosity flourished. Gradually, the human mind evolved into something capable of reflecting upon its own existence. That journey continues today. Every fossil uncovered, every archaeological site excavated, every ancient genome sequenced. Each brings us closer to understanding where we came from. Yet the greatest mystery accompanies us every moment. The consciousness reading these words is the product of millions of years of evolution, a process that remains only partly understood. Perhaps that is the perfect ending to the story of prehistoric mysteries. After exploring vanished human relatives, changing climates, ancient migrations, lost ecosystems, and forgotten partnerships, we arrive at the one mystery that has been with us all along. The greatest unknown is not buried beneath the earth. It exists within every human mind, and as long as we continue asking questions about our distant past, the search for that answer will continue as well.